Right now on WUSA 9 News at 6:30, we're helping you get ready for Election Day in Virginia. Thanks for streaming with us here on WUSA 9 Plus. I'm Rafael Sanchez Cruz.
And I'm Annie Yu. Welcome in. We are exactly 3 weeks away from November 4th, Tuesday. That is why we are launching this new special Virginia Decide.
Yeah, every Tuesday and Friday, we'll be digging into the big statewide races, talking about the issues that matter to you and the impacts we could see across the Commonwealth.
So these are the three big races that we'll be focusing on. First up, the governor's race. Incumbent Governor Glenn Youngkin cannot run for re-election, so his Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears is running on the Republican side. She's facing off a Democrat, Abigail Spanberger. Spanberger is a former U.S. representative. Whoever wins will make history as Virginia's first female governor.
History could also be made in the lieutenant governor's race. The Democratic nominee is State Senator Ghazala Hashimi. If she wins, she would be the first Muslim and Indian American to hold that office. The Republican nominee is former WRVA radio host John Reed. He would be Virginia's first openly gay lieutenant governor.
We're also watching the Attorney General's race, which has gotten very heated in the last few weeks. Democrat Jay Jones previously served in the Virginia House of Delegates. Republican Jason Miyares is running for re-election, and we'll get into the controversy surrounding that race in just a few minutes.
But first, we have a new sound from both candidates for governor tonight. Abigail Spanberger and Winsome Earle-Sears spoke separately to business and education leaders about the economy. It's the first time they've spoken publicly since last week's debate.
And our Matthew Torres traveled to Richmond, where the focus of their speeches couldn't be more different.
At the 2025 Virginia Education and Workforce Conference, the goal is to explore new investments and partnerships between businesses and schools to boost Virginia's economy. Abigail Spanberger says that, too, is her goal.
And I believe that our competitive advantage is our people. It's our talent.
But she says the Commonwealth needs to navigate the impacts of the Trump administration's federal workforce cuts by helping displaced workers and creating job growth.
And the chaos coming out of Washington isn't just bad policy, it's creating real harm for Virginia families and businesses.
While never mentioning her Republican opponent, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears, or current Governor Glenn Youngkin, Spanberger stressed she would be a better governor because she'd be a reliable partner to fight back against federal shrinking and stand up to President Trump.
We need a governor who will put Virginia, not a president, not a party, first. And if a president's policies hurt our workforce or our economy, the governor must stand up and push back. That's not disloyalty, that is doing the job.
She reminded today's attendees of her economic plan, which includes expanding internships, recruiting more teachers, increasing the minimum wage, and protecting workers' rights. But whoever becomes governor, the interim president for the Virginia Chamber of Commerce says there's a clear issue to address immediately, hence the reason for this conference.
And the number one issue by far, not even close, is a highly trained, well-educated workforce. So to be competitive, for economic development, to attract businesses, to grow businesses in the state, we also have to grow our talent.
Current Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears says she would prioritize improving the pipeline from community colleges to new jobs, staying competitive against China, and preparing students for artificial intelligence skills and opportunities.
We are building bridges between industry and academia to ensure that AI doesn't replace people, it empowers them.
Earle-Sears never once addressed the federal layoffs impacting so many Virginians and the recent drop in CNBC's ranking as the top state for business. Opponents blast her for supporting President Donald Trump's policies. Instead, she focused her message on touting her upbringing and worked with Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin to bring $140 billion in investments, increase teacher pay, and $50 million to support HBCUs.
We've shown that when government, business, and education come together, Virginia doesn't just compete. Folks, we lead.
The only time Earle-Sears mentioned her Democratic opponent Abigail Spanberger was over their differences in workers joining a union. She's outright against it.
I will always defend Virginia's right to work. It's not an abstract policy to me.
The Virginia Chamber of Commerce says based on feedback from businesses, it'll present a blueprint on economic development for whoever claims the title of Virginia's next governor.
We're optimistic about a partnership we'll have with the next governor and the collaboration we have with the business community and higher education moving forward.
In Richmond, Matthew Torres, WUSA 9.
Now, 4 years ago, the topic of education helped fuel Governor Glenn Youngkin's win. And this time around, we know the economy and also federal layoffs top the list of concerns in the Commonwealth. But education is still a very important issue. And Marcella Robertson takes a closer look at the role that it plays in this race.
Education may not be the most important issue for Virginians, but it still has a major impact. Republican nominee Winsome Earl-Sears made the transgender student policies the entire focus of her campaign. And at last week's debate, we saw a clear stance from her Democratic opponent, Abigail Spanberger, on how involved parents should be in their children's education. When the two candidates in this year's race for Virginia governor took the debate stage last week,
set a better example.
we saw a contentious back and forth of interruptions. One issue the candidates clashed on was transgender student policies in schools.
Should transgender girls who are biological males be allowed to use girls' bathrooms and play on girls' sports teams in K through 12?
In cases across Virginia, I think it's incumbent upon parents and educators and administrators in each local community to make decisions locally.
That's what this is about.
Ms. Earl-Sears?
There should never be nude men in locker rooms.
We finally have her saying that, but you voted for that.
Ms. Earl-Sears.
Have you finally
My opponent
Ms.
said
Earl-Sears, you
that
are
now?
just intruding on time here.
Are we in agreement now? Are you
Ms.
going to
Earl-Sears?
tell?
The second issue was how involved parents should be in their students' curriculum. Democrat Terry McAuliffe's stance on education during the 2021 debate in the Virginia governor's race is considered a major factor that contributed to his loss.
I stopped the bill that I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
That question was asked again at this year's debate.
Well, I absolutely believe that parents ought to be involved in their child's education. You know, I am my child's first teacher, and I don't co-parent with the government.
It is important that parents are involved every step of the way, as I have been.
Then
In
why
fact,
did you vote against
with my
Rights Act?
with my ninth grade daughter, who is actually here with us in the audience.
ODU political science professor Jesse Richmond says knowing what happened 4 years ago, Spanberger knew how important her answer was to this question.
Spanberger, you could see, had a much stronger answer. She gave McAuliffe a lesson in how he ought to have answered that, in terms of talking about her own involvement, expressing her view that parents have to be actively involved in the education of their children.
It's unclear if last week's debate was enough to sway some voters. Keep in mind, early voting has already been underway for nearly a month, and many Virginians have already cast their ballots. Marcella Robertson, WUSA 9.
Yeah, tonight a new poll shows the race for governor is getting even tighter. Take a look at these numbers from the Trafalgar Group. It shows Spanberger leading Earl-Sears by 2.5 points earlier this month. Spanberger was leading with more than 5 points. We're also seeing more support for Republican Jason Miyares in the Attorney General race. Miyares now leads Democrat Jay Jones by more than 5 points. Jones had been ahead of Miyares until the recent text scandal broke.
And those texts threatened violence against Republican Todd Gilbert. He was the Speaker of the House of Delegates. The messages said, quote, 3 people, 2 bullets, Gilbert, Hitler, and Pol Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets in the head. He also mentioned wanting to urinate on Republicans' graves. Now, Jones released a statement apologizing. He said, quote, this was a grave mistake, and I will work every day to prove to the people of Virginia that I will fight for them as Attorney General, end quote. Now, his opponent, Jason Miyares, says that Jones should have apologized back in 2022 when those text messages were sent.
I don't actually believe those are real apologies so far. I think the reality is he was called out at the time. He had a chance, he didn't. And I do think what it does show is a mindset that I think makes him, disqualified from serving in this office.
There's been a lot of talk about whether Jones's texts will impact fellow Democrat Abigail Spanberger's race for governor. She said that she was disgusted by the messages, but did not ask for him to step down. That was during the debate. Don Scott, Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates, also weighed in on the 2 races.
And I think right now we have to give Abigail Spanberger the opportunity to run her own race. She's accountable for her words and what she said, and not accountable for the words that Jay Jones has said. She has condemned them. She has condemned them many, many times. She continues to. And now we hope that we will continue to run the race that we need Virginians to focus on, which is the issues, the economic issues and the economic turmoil that's coming out of Washington, D.C.
So far, Jones himself has not agreed to do an interview with us.
Yeah, that's right. We want to talk more about this race and how it could impact others on the ballot. Joining us now is Dr. Stephen Farnsworth. He's a political analyst at University of Mary Washington. Thank you for joining us. Let's start right off. How significant is this year's Attorney General race for Virginia in terms of politics?
Well, it's absolutely the center of the conversation for these last 2 weeks. We're really looking at a horrific statement by the Democratic candidate for the Attorney General's office, and that has been a narrative that has really continued, in part through Republican efforts to make it so, a key question going forward. I do think, though, that the very aggressive efforts on the part of the rest of the Democratic ticket and other Democratic candidates to distance themselves from Jones does mean that this is largely going to be contained to the Jones campaign itself.
Dr. Farnsworth, what's at stake here? How the outcome might shape the political landscape in the future? Just give us a little more sense of what's at stake.
Well, the Attorney General's race is very much the key component of the cultural dynamics that are playing out between left and right in Virginia. The Attorney General has a key role to play in terms of deciding what kind of litigation to engage in. Oftentimes, the Attorney Generals, if they're of the opposing party to the party controlling the White House, actually sue the federal government more frequently. And so there are a lot of those kinds of issues. Central, of course, to these issues involve the key battleground questions of gay marriage, of abortion, of sexual and racial identities, and whether or not there is equality or inequity. Those kinds of questions, they have very polarized answers depending on whether the individual is a Republican or a Democrat, and those are often the key issues that attorney generals focus on once they're in office. It's a key stepping stone, of course, to being a candidate for governor 4 years later.
Farnsworth, are you surprised that Jay Jones hasn't stepped aside given the scandal that he's dealing with?
Well, this is horrible, no doubt about it, and we'll leave Jay Jones to make comments that he wants to make about this situation. I think that there will be a significant number of voters who are Democrats who are going to be hesitant to sign up for his campaign. I can imagine some Democrats leaving that third line ballot blank. On the ballot. So there are, I think, significant challenges here. But it's also important to recognize that in many ways the train not only has left the station with respect to this election, but it's well down the tracks. There has been early voting going on for nearly a month now. Many votes were cast before we even heard of these tech scandals. And so the Democratic Party didn't really have a lot of good options here in terms of replacing a candidate this late in the process. But the voters will have a say, those who haven't voted yet, on how they consider this disqualifying or not.
That's right. Voters will have a say come Tuesday, November 4th. Dr. Farnsworth, you mentioned some of the issues that are top of mind for voters. We know that education, the economy, the federal layoffs, those are all very important issues on the minds of voters. What other hot button issues are on the minds?
Well, I really do think that the economy is crowding out everything else. You look at the economic anxiety that people face in this country, made doubly intense, of course, in Northern Virginia and in other parts of the state with high levels of federal employment. You look about the shutdowns, you look at the issues of people who have lost their jobs through the various cutbacks of the Trump administration during the first year in office. And those kinds of things create a lot of economic pain, a lot of economic anxiety, and it spreads far beyond the individual people who might be losing their jobs or worried they might lose their jobs. You think about people who are selling real estate or cars or appliances. I mean, all the consumers who are thinking about buying these things, if they're worried about the economic future, they're not going to make those kinds of big purchases. And that's a big, big problem. I think that when you look at the larger dynamics of the issues that are really motivating people, it's very much this question of economic dynamics. Sure, there are some people who say education is a top priority. Some people who say the question of trans rights is a top priority. But these are much, much smaller issues than the key question of that economic anxiety. It was a key issue last year. It looks to be a key issue this year as well.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Farnsworth, before you leave, so both candidates for the Attorney General position will face off Thursday in their only debate before the election. What do you think we'll see?
Well, I think one of the things to recognize is that we live in very contentious times. And if you think back to that governor's debate last week, I'm not sure that the lieutenant governor helped herself by being as combative as she was. I think that Miyares will have to consider whether or not he wants to go down that same road. I think that that's kind of off-putting to some voters to see just a person who can't even let the other side be heard. I think that's a particularly dangerous strategy for Miyares to engage in. That being said, the topic is going to be those J. Jones texts that we've been talking about during our time here tonight, and as Virginia has been talking about them for 2 years. I think the key question for Jones is how he can deal with this in a head-to-head conversation with Miyares. I think that one of the things you might see is sort of like the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky story. You start with an apology, and then you go after the critics. I'm not sure that it is going to be sufficient for J. Jones. This is a serious, serious threat to him. But remember, Bill Clinton did survive what some people at the time thought was a career-ending scandal by turning the tables on his accusers once he'd made his apologies.
As we're being bombarded with ads, we want to thank you for providing some context to, all that we're seeing play out. Thank you so much, Dr. Farnsworth.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'll be able to watch the debate between J. Jones and Jason Miyares right here on WUSA 9+. We'll be streaming it live starting at 6 p.m. Our Matthew Torres is also going down to Richmond for that debate. He'll have a complete coverage and reaction Thursday night on the news at 11.
And an easy-to-use voter guide with everything you need to know. Just text the word VOTE to the number on your screen. It's 202-895-5599, and we will reply with the link straight to our guide. And you can also find it on our website, WUSA9.com. We'll be right back with a check of your forecast.